The late American writer David Foster Wallace once said, "The most obvious, ubiquitous, and important realities are often the ones hardest to see and talk about." One such obvious, ubiquitous, and important reality facing us today is the runaway growth and impending systemic collapse of our megacities unless we do something about it. For example, Delhi and Bangalore have expanded by more than 3 times over the last 30 years, swamped by migrations from their hinterland areas. Mumbai, Calcutta, and Chennai are not far behind. What is scary is that these megacities may expand by another 3 times over the next 30 years. Are we prepared for it? That's the question. A recent WHO survey of air pollution in 7,800 cities across 134 countries revealed that of the 100 most polluted cities in the world, 83 were in India. 83 out of 100. Unexpected and uncontrolled urbanization has created several other problems that you all know of: slums, poor sanitation, flooding, water scarcity, degraded rivers, transportation failure, and rapidly depleting open spaces and green spaces. These problems, daunting as they are, have been compounded by climate change. Climate change is a very mild expression. I'm surprised why they're using that. It should actually be called climate crisis for reasons which I'll explain shortly. If you want to understand the kind of economic misery and loss of life that climate change can potentially cause, just look back to COVID-19 epidemic. Then imagine the same damage happening over a much longer period, possibly decades. As in the case of COVID-19, it's always the poorer countries and the poorer sections of the society who will be most affected by climate change. Managing the problems arising from rapid urbanization in an age of climate change and making our cities sustainable or at least survivable is the biggest challenge before the government. This is the subject of my talk. The legendary investor Warren Buffett once said, "Investing is simple but not easy." What he meant was there are certain things in life which are simple in theory but difficult in practice. Investing is one of them. Playing cricket or golf is another. Losing weight is a third example. I know all about dieting and exercise, but as you can see from my size and shape, I'm not good at practicing them. What I'm going to say in my talk today is not quantum physics or rocket mechanics. Most of the points are very simple in theory, but they are extremely difficult to implement. They call for clear political vision, long-term planning, steadfast efforts, effective enforcement of regulations, and continuous education to modify public behavior. In our government setup, all these things are very difficult. You may have noticed that I did not mention finance. Having worked in government for many decades, I believe that the problem with government is not paucity of resources, it is misapplication of resources, of throwing good money after bad schemes. In any case, when the very survival of our cities and our civilization is at stake, finance, one of the least constraints. Liberal external aid for city development and climate change initiatives can always be obtained. Is climate change for real? There's a saying in English, past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. This applies to the planet Earth also. The Earth's climate has changed several times in the past as it went through ice ages and warm interglacial periods, so you can expect it to happen again. You are probably aware of this story. If you put some frogs into a kettle of boiling water, they will leap out immediately. But if you put the same frogs in a kettle of water at room temperature and heat the water slowly to boiling point, the frogs will remain in the water and die. Our thinking with regard to climate change is somewhat similar. We are blind to creeping dangers. I assume that all of you know what the greenhouse effect is and why the earth is warming. Carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and fluorinated gases used in refrigerators and air conditioners are the greenhouse gases responsible for global warming. CO2 is the biggest culprit, as you can see. It contributes to 76% of greenhouse gas emissions. Nearly every human activity, burning fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas in industrial processes and transportation, felling trees, rearing cattle and other livestock, growing paddy and other agricultural crops, constructing buildings and roads, dumping organic waste in landfills, nearly everything we do emits one or the other of these greenhouse gases. What is worse, they stay in the atmosphere for several decades and even centuries. For example, once emitted, 40% of carbon dioxide still remains after 100 years. 20% still remains after 1,000 years. 10% still remains after 10,000 years. About 20% of the carbon dioxide breathed out by Raja Cholan is still there somewhere around. Methane, nitrous oxide, and F gases are more potent than carbon dioxide, but they have a much shorter atmospheric lifetime, just a few decades. Climate scientists use the term CO2 equivalent, so that you take club all the gases together, or just CO2 emissions, the equivalence is assumed. As I mentioned here, every year, about 51 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions are emitted into the atmosphere every year, year after year. If we are going to avoid a climate disaster, then we have to reach net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. In other words, we must minimize CO2 emissions as much as possible, and whatever remains must be absorbed and stored. The technical term for this is sequestration of carbon. Remember that during COVID-19, when all life and all economic activity seemed to come to a standstill, the drop in CO2 emissions was just 5 to 10%. It was still 46 to 48 billion tons of CO2. So going to net zero by 2050 is going to be extremely difficult without sacrificing our economic development. India has committed to reach this goal by 2070. We have been given 20 years grace time. This is a famous graph. It's called the Keeling curve. There are many famous equations and graphs in science. One is E is equal to mc squared of Einstein. Another is the bell curve or the normal distribution curve in statistics. The Keeling curve measures the carbon dioxide concentration year after year. A scientist called David Keeling did this in an observatory in Hawaii, and he faithfully kept records, and he found that the carbon dioxide concentration was steadily going up. This was the first time that scientists realized that there is a problem. Then scientists started looking backwards. They looked backward for 2,000 years, and they found that the Earth's carbon dioxide concentration was fairly steady up to about 1850. And then it started going up. You know why. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution happened. Then the internal combustion engines were invented, which run on petrol and diesel, and were used in cars, buses, ships, airplanes, everything. So there's a sudden spike in the carbon dioxide emissions from 1850 onwards, and more so after 1960. Then scientists went back further, 4 lakh years. They have the techniques for finding the carbon dioxide concentrations hidden in ice cores and all that. And they found that there's a clear correlation between the carbon dioxide concentration and the mean temperature of the Earth. Every time the carbon dioxide concentration went up, the Earth's temperature went up. Every time it went down, the Earth's temperature went down. And as you can see on the right, currently the carbon dioxide concentration is far, far above anything that was there in the last 4 lakh years. We are now into uncharted territory. Now, here, scientists have tried to project as to what the temperature increase will be if things continue as usual around 2100 BC. They have projected that it will be somewhere between 3.3 degrees Celsius and 5.7 degrees Celsius. The goal is to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050 and bring it down thereafter. Of particular concern are tipping points. You know what are tipping points? Things do not happen gradually. They will happen, suddenly there will be a change and there may be a precipitous drop. Climate change is expected to cause more extreme weather events, more intense heat waves and wildfires, more violent storms, more floods and droughts, more crop failures. On December 1st, 2015, when we had that major flood, 25% of Chennai's annual rainfall of 1,400 millimeters fell on just one day. 25% of the rain fell on one day. So what is happening now is rains are, intense storms, intense rainfall, but spread out. That's what is happening. Climate change is expected to cause rise in sea levels and acidification of the oceans. As you know, when something is heated, it expands. When the ocean water becomes warmer, it is going to expand. And when carbon dioxide dissolves in water, you get carbonic acid, which is acidic. That's going to dissolve the coral reefs and the shells of sea creatures, which can have effects. Coastal cities are particularly vulnerable. Chennai is a coastal city. And most of the great cities of the world are coastal cities. Greenhouses are a global externality, a double free riding problem. Free riding on OC. I mean, some countries will implement costly measures, others will free ride on their efforts. The present generation may free ride on the efforts of the future generations. Mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation means we must make efforts to mitigate the impact of climate change. Adaptation, to give an example, there is a saying, if rape is inevitable, lie down and enjoy it. So some people say there's no way we are going to solve this climate change problem. We have to face it. I mean, there is going to be desertification, there's going to be mass migration. Maybe Siberia will become warm and people may have to migrate to Siberia. I don't think Russians will allow it, but I'm saying that people say we have to adapt. Now, this is an excellent book. I suggest that you read it. It lists 100 measures. It covers almost the entire gamut of measures needed to deal with climate change. Now, our friend Irenbu here was often fond of saying, if you don't take hard decisions now, you will have to take harder decisions later. This is very true of climate change. If you don't take effective decisions and now, you'll have to take harder decisions and costly decisions later. Powerful lobbies within countries can thwart measures. As you know, Donald Trump was against this. And you may know the story of the tobacco lobby and the cigarette companies. Even though it was known way back in the 1950s that there is a clear link between tobacco smoking and cancer and a host of other diseases, the tobacco lobby successfully thwarted all regulatory attempts for about 40 to 50 years. They engage scientists, unscrupulous scientists, who would, write counter. The idea was if you can't convince, then confuse. That was the whole idea. Now, the same thing is happening in climate change also. Only difference here is almost every industry is involved here. So the resistance is going to be greater. Now, many of us think that climate change is a problem to be solved by the central government. We think that the generation of more solar power and wind power, the development of better electric batteries or other systems of storage, the adoption of electric vehicles, the use of green hydrogen and green ammonia as industrial fuels, the adoption of LED lights and other energy efficient devices, the levy of a carbon tax or the implementation of a cap and trade carbon permits can help us reach net zero by 2070. All these measures are necessary, but they're not sufficient. The real battle for climate change will be waged not in Delhi, but in all our cities. That's where the war is going to be fought. How our cities are planned, how they are designed, and how they grow is going to play a critical role in our ability to fight climate change. And this is the subject of my talk. Now, can you tell me, something happened on May 23, 2007. Something very momentous happened. Can anybody tell me what happened? Very good. On that day, for the first time in human history, the world's urban population exceeded the rural population. and more people started living in cities than in villages. Now, the 20th century has been called the urban century. Humanity is adding an urban area the size of New York City every month. Global urban population is expected to cross 2/3 by 2050. And as you know, cities are where all the action is. They contribute the bulk of a nation's GDP, employment, commerce, innovation. They consume 80% of the world's energy and produce 75% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. Now, about the problems of cities, I told you already. One of the problems which most of us are not aware of is the problem of slums. Globally, 25% of the people live in slums. In India, it is 49%. In Mumbai, it is 55%. Now, this is an interesting study done in Europe in offices. They found that 42% of European office employees had no natural light in their working environment. 55% had no access to any greenery. 7% had no windows in their workplace. Now, this is the case in Europe. You can well imagine what the situation will be in our offices. The noise, crowds, unnatural lighting, rapid shrinking of green and open spaces, and alienation cause an urban psychological penalty. Many people are not aware of this. Living in cities actually causes mental health problems. It has been proven. It is not, a joke. So the next time you are annoyed with your friend or a spouse or relatives, don't blame them. Blame the city. Now, India's urban population was 31% as per the 2011 census. And now it's estimated to be 36%. You can see the urban populations of other countries. China is 64%. Russia is 75%, Brazil is 88%, Japan is 92%. Now, my question is this. If we are having so many problems when the urban population percentage is only 36%, what will happen when it becomes 50%, 75%, 90%? Of course, even though it is 36%, in terms of absolute numbers, we have a huge urban population, second only to China. But at the rate at which our urban population is growing, we are going to face a real problem. India's urban population is expected to cross 50% by 2050. After that, Mahatma Gandhi's statement that India lives in its villages will no longer be true. The three states, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Maharashtra, were close to 50% even in 2011. I'm sure they would have all crossed 50% by now. Now, there are two patterns of urbanization in India. One is dispersed urbanization, other is concentrated urbanization. Dispersed urbanization, you have, apart from the capital city, you have several other cities which are decent, which are reasonably big. In concentrated urbanization, only the capital city is very big, other cities are much smaller relative to it. For example, if you compare the population, if you compute the ratio of the capital city and the second biggest city, in Tamil Nadu, the ratio of Chennai and Coimbatore is 4:1. In Kerala, Trivandrum and Cochin ratio is 1.7:1. In Maharashtra, the ratio of Mumbai and Pune is 3.7:1. These are states with dispersed urbanization. There are several big cities apart from the capital cities. Whereas in Karnataka, the ratio of Bangalore's population and Mysore's population is 8.5:1. In Telangana, Hyderabad is to Warangal, 15.5:1. In West Bengal, Kolkata is to Asansol, the second biggest city, is 11.7:1. Needless to say, dispersed urbanization is better than concentrated urbanization. Now, there are three terms which you should know. Tier 1 cities whose population is more than 1 lakh. Metropolitan cities whose population is more than 10 lakhs. Strictly speaking, it's an area. And mega cities whose population is more than 100 lakhs or 1 crore. Now, India's urban population is concentrated mostly in these cities, Tier 1, metropolitan, and mega cities. The Tier 2 to Tier 6 and villages are all being hollowed out. People are migrating from them to the bigger cities. In 1965, there were only 2 megacities in the world, New York and Tokyo. In 2023, there were 45 megacities. Megacities are cities with a population more than 1 crore. Most of them are in Asia, 5 are in India. You can see the graph. Tokyo, 40.8 million. Shanghai, Delhi, Jakarta, Chennai comes last, 12.2. 5 Indian cities figure in this, and I'm sure very soon Hyderabad and Ahmedabad also will be added to the list. Now, it is not just in our cities, Karachi in Pakistan, Dhaka in Bangladesh, Manila in Philippines, Jakarta in Indonesia, Bangkok in Thailand, Beijing and Shanghai in China, all have grown like anything. They've all expanded by 3 to 5 times over the last 30 years. They've grown haphazardly and unexpectedly. So this is a famous quotation from Patrick Bingham Hall, a city planner and architect. He says, Asian megacities grew so rapidly and unexpectedly that governments and urban planners could only play catch-up. Unless something is done quickly, the most predictable crisis facing 21st century civilization is the descent of Asian megacities into a state of potentially terminal dysfunction. So it is not just an Indian problem, it's an Asian problem. Now this is the aerial view of Shanghai city. How would you administer a city like this? And Shanghai is next to 3 or 4 other cities, Nanjing, Hangzhou, Suzhou, and collectively the population is about 10 crores, and you have to manage this. Urban neglect. Now in India, local government is a state subject under the constitution. Till 2005, India's political system was heavily biased towards the rural sector. நம்ம ஆளுங்க கிராமத்தாளுங்கனாலயா என்னமோ தெரியல, but then there is a clear neglect of the rural sector. The cities, the urban local bodies were left to fend for themselves. Urban local bodies had few schemes or function-specific grants. Many were lacking in finances and institutional capacity. Even now, I think many are lacking in finances. They're barely able to pay their salaries, barely able to pay the pensions. There has been some course correction and sharper urban focus since 2005. After the Jawaharlal Nehru National Urban Renewal Mission, JNNURM, there has been some course correction. It was the first major scheme for urban areas, whereas rural department had several schemes, since independence. In 2011, the Manmohan Singh government appointed a high-power committee to assess how much funds would be needed to rejuvenate to create and renew India's urban infrastructure over a 20-year period, from 2012 to 2032. They came up with a figure of 40 lakh crores for 20 years, or 2 lakh crores per year. This is the amount you have to spend to keep our cities in top shape. But the total funds allocated since 2015 for urban development schemes like Smart Cities Mission, Amrit, Swachh Bharat Mission Urban are less than 6 lakh crores. For all these years put together, since 2015, they were not elected even 6 lakh crores. Now, Government of India's point is, கொடுத்த பணமே உன்னால செலவு பண்ண முடியல. You don't have the capacity to spend even the small money that we are giving you. So, though the money is inadequate, we don't have the capacity to spend even this low level of funding. So, along with greater infrastructure funding, institutional reforms are necessary. I think we need to seriously reform urban governance. We need to create more posts, create maybe a district urban development agency in each district, whatever, and we should stop creating more and more districts. I think they're becoming too small. And we need to seriously do something about cities. Policy makers in the states and center are yet to come to grips with the seriousness of the problems. I personally think that our political leaders at all levels have not understood the seriousness of the problem. Unmanaged urban growth. Now, city planning is a topic of great interest abroad. People take a lot of interest in the way their city develops, how the city is planned. But in India, though we appreciate beautifully planned cities like New Delhi or Chandigarh or whatever, we don't seem to talk much about city planning. As you know, most Indian cities are old and grew organically. We have only a handful of planned cities. Most of them have grown haphazardly. Some megacities and metropolitan cities draw up a master plan that is a framework for the future growth of a city for 10 to 20 years. But master planning is usually confined to zoning. It does not include key areas such as urban infrastructure, transportation, and environment. Creation of new blue and green infrastructure and conservation of existing ones are given little or no priority. For example, the Amrit Atal Mission for Urban Rejuvenation and Transformation. Only 2% of the funds, first of all, the amount is not enough, 1 lakh crores. Only 2% of the funds is allocated for parks and gardens. And in Corporation of Chennai, there are 350 engineers and only 3 horticulturists. that shows the importance given to grey infrastructure and green infrastructure. I suppose all of you know what floor space index FSI is. It's the ratio of the built-up area to the plot area. The higher the FSI, the greater the floor area that can be built on a plot of land. Higher FSI imposes greater infrastructure load on ULB, on the urban local body, through increased demand for drinking water, sewerage, solid waste management, and increased vehicular traffic. You can't endlessly go on increasing FSI. Where there is one building, it is demolished, and if you put up an apartment complex of, say, 6 apartments, the water supply requirement will become 6x, the sewage outgo will become 6x, the traffic, in terms of cars will become 6x. The pipes on that road may not have the capacity to carry this kind of load. Even if you replace those pipes on that road, the pipes upstream and downstream may not be in a position to handle. So there are a lot of problems. The road width is a constraint on permissible FSI. Given the low widths of city roads and inadequate municipal infrastructure, most Indian cities permit low FSI 1 to 2. With low FSI, high-rise, high-density urban land use is not feasible. This leads to urban sprawl. Because our cities are old and unplanned, roads are narrow. Because the roads are narrow, you can't give high FSI. Because you don't have high FSI, you can't go beyond certain number of floors. So urban sprawl, that is, the city can only spread horizontally, not vertically. Now, in 2010, I played a role in the expansion of Chennai city from 176 square kilometers to 426 square kilometers, and 17 other cities, mostly capital cities in the state. Coimbatore, we expanded it from 115 square kilometers to 265 square kilometers. Madurai from 49 square kilometers to 152 square kilometers. Even Madurai High Court was in a village panchayat. And almost every district headquarters, we expanded the boundaries. At that time, I was quite proud of it. Hosur, I expanded it from 11 square kilometers, which it was when I was sub-collector in 1985. It was still 11 square kilometers in 2010 when I became Municipal Administration Secretary. Expanded Hosur from 11 square kilometers to 83 square kilometers. At that time, I was quite proud of it. But now I realize that while expansion must be done, but these added areas are even worse than the core city, because CMDA regulations are very liberal for the added areas, because they were previously villages or small towns. So you don't have wide roads, and they are even worse than the core city. And so things are becoming worse and worse. I hope you get my point. Whereas in 60s and 70s, they planned a series of layouts, Anna Nagar, this Nagar, that Nagar, and all that. Now we have stopped doing it. We have just allowed things to take their own, this one. With the result, you find that the added areas are worse than the core city. I was Vice Chancellor in Indian Maritime University in Uthandi. And as long as I was there, till 2017, the water connection and sewerage connection had not been given. So I had to pay some 1.6 crores specially to Metro Water to lay a separate line for me. And to my knowledge, sewerage connection is yet to be given in the added areas. If we do not plan greenfield satellite cities, rethink our current city planning template, and regenerate existing cities where feasible, our overloaded megacities and metropolitan cities will be at risk of systemic collapse. How and why city design matters. As I said already, the battle against climate change will be won or lost in our cities. Now, there are 5 very important aspects as regards climate change, but they also are important from other aspects. First, what is the city's spatial form? Is it a sprawling city or is it a dense high-rise city? Second, how people move around. Private automobiles versus public transport, cycling and walking. Third, how the city's buildings are designed, constructed and operated. Is the city mired in energy-guzzling, artificially lighted, heated and cooled buildings built with materials having high carbon footprint? How biophilic the city is. Biophilia means love of nature. How much green cover it has and its approach towards nature-based solutions. I'll explain each of them later. How circular the city's economy is. How effectively it recycles or reuses solid waste and liquid waste or recovers useful materials from them. Now, each of these points is important. This is the vision of a climate resilient city. It must grow vertical. It must be high density. Now, if it's high density, it's not likely to be sociable, so you must make it high amenity and sociable. It must prioritize public transport, walking and cycling. It must be biophilic. It must be circular. It must aim to be net zero in terms of carbon emissions. Now, this is a picture of Vancouver city. In 2021, I was stuck in Vancouver for 8 months, where my sons are living because of COVID-19. It's a really beautiful city. Every year, the Economist magazine publishes the list of the most livable cities in the world. Vancouver usually figures in the top 3. And according to Vancouverians, it is the most beautiful city in the Milky Way. And I didn't know it at that time, but I later found that there is a term called Vancouverism in city planning and architecture. It means developing what I said just now, all these things which I said for a climate resilient city. Between 1985 and 2010, Vancouver incorporated most of these points that I mentioned here, and it became a model city. Canada, for example, has 3 times the land area of India, and its population is only half of Tamil Nadu. So land is not a problem there. But still, the city planners of Vancouver realized that they should go vertical. And they went to the extent of saying the high-rise towers, where the high-rise towers should be put, so that you don't block the view of the mountains and the sea and all that. And what you see, the green one there is a big park, 200 square kilometers, 200 acres park called Stanley Park. Nice bicycling lanes, excellent for walking, very well-designed city. Now, the interesting thing is this. The measures to mitigate the effects of climate change are also the measures to solve the problems of sprawl, traffic congestion, air pollution, water scarcity, degradation of rivers, lakes, urban flooding, etc. A case of killing several birds with one stone. That is, if you try to solve your climate change problem, you're automatically solving all the other urban problems also. The good news is that this new vision has been demonstrated to be feasible. Almost every component of this new vision is already being implemented in India, here and there, on a small scale. You may say, after all, we are doing everything. As I said earlier, knowing is not the same as doing, and sketchy, piecemeal, and fragmented initiatives are not enough. We need a coherent strategy. It is necessary to transform these scattered initiatives into a national strategy. You may remember that the previous president, APJ Abdul Kalam, came up with a scheme, of course it never took off, called PURA, Provision of Urban Amenities in Rural Areas. But I think the exact reverse is the correct thing. We should be providing rural amenities, community living, fresh air, lots of greenery in urban areas. That's what we should be doing. It is possible to do this through innovative city planning and design. Now, I told you the 5 issues there. I'll explain each one of them. First is city spatial form. Urban sprawl is bad. Urban sprawl is city growing horizontally rather than vertically. As you know, Chennai, I think on one side it may go up to Mahabalipuram, Vanur, Pondicherry. Another side it may go up to Kanchipuram, Vellore. Third side it may go up to merge with, Ennur. If the city keeps growing sideways like this, you are not going to be able to manage. Now, these mistakes were made by USA and Europe and other countries in the 1960s and 70s. A lot has been written about urban sprawl in those countries. We seem to be about 50 years behind the curve, and we are making all those mistakes now. And we don't seem to be doing any course correction. India's urban sprawl of both the US type and the China type. US type is low density sprawl, big compounds, one or 2-story houses. China, multi-storied compound, both are sprawl. India has both types. Before automobiles came along, cities were compact. People used to walk or cycle or take a tram or a bus. They could reach all areas of the city in this manner. Once automobiles came along, people thought they could live in the suburbs. So sprawl leads to private automobile dependency, longer commuting times, traffic jams, accidents, air pollution, poor health conditions. When I was Vice Chancellor, it used to take me 1.5 hours to go from my university to my house, and 1.5 hours back. 3 hours every day I spent in the car. It leads to loss of valuable agricultural land, water bodies, natural wetlands, floodplains, biodiversity. You know all this. The replacement of natural terrain with impervious surfaces, concrete, cement, concrete, and asphalt surface causes urban flooding. I'll come to this later. If you look out at any road, you will find it's completely impervious. You have concrete sidewalks on both sides, then the asphalt road, there's no place for the water to go. So when it rains, there has to be a flood. Large areas are required for parking motorized vehicles. Provision of services like drinking water, sewerage, stormwater drains, and public transit always lags behind a rapidly expanding city. If the city keeps going out like this, low density growth, you can't expect the corporation or the metro water to keep providing you all the services, because low density growth, outward growth, is not conducive to provision of services. Low density urban sprawl increases the per user cost of provision of these services and renders it uneconomical for smaller localities. That's why even after 10 years or 14 years, you still, many of those arid areas still don't have water and sewerage supply. But more important than all these, sprawl is bad from the point of view of climate change. It leads to higher greenhouse gas emissions and a greater carbon footprint. It's obvious because people will be using a lot of automobiles, a lot of commuting. Now, this is a famous study by the University of California, Berkeley. In 2014, it showed that carbon dioxide emissions per capita in the city core was much less, and in the suburban areas was much more. Suburban areas are shown as orange and red, city core in green. You will find that all the cities are green. The dense urban cores are green, the urban sprawl areas are red. In other words, suburban sprawl cancels carbon footprint savings of dense urban cores. If cities are to limit their carbon footprint and avoid the manifold problems associated with urban sprawl, they must grow vertically. The short point here is the 20th century urban planning template is no longer applicable to the 21st century. You can't grow outward. You have to grow vertically. By vertical growth, we mean ultra high-rise buildings, not some 20 floors. I think even in Nerkundram, you have 20 floors now. We mean 50, 100, or even more stories high. It will call for streets of very great width to enable very high FSI, not possible in existing cities. If you give very high FSI in the existing city, it's going to collapse. I mean, it's already choking, it will choke more. So if you want to go high, then you have to go plan a new city. There is a Government of India scheme for satellite cities, but I don't think much funding is there, and people are building the same type of cities again and again. We need to plan at least one new satellite city for each metropolitan city and at least 2 new satellite cities for each mega city. Now, don't say where is the money? Money can always be found. As I said, instead of creating new districts, please create new satellite cities. We need to create satellite cities which are dense and vertical. You can't allow city to grow like this. At one time, for example, Delhi has now become 1,400 square kilometers. Bangalore is 740 square kilometers. Chennai is comparatively manageable, 426 square kilometers. Imagine what will happen if Chennai is to 1,400 square kilometers. It will be unmanageable. Unlike the existing satellite cities which mimic the main city, the new satellite cities must be vertical and dense with a prescribed minimum and maximum density and FSI. You may have to prescribe a minimum density also. You don't want jokers putting up single-storied houses and all that. You may have to prescribe a minimum density FSI and also maximum FSI. I'll just give the figures of maximum FSI in some cities. New York 15, Los Angeles 13, Singapore 25, Tokyo 20, Hong Kong 15. Greater Chennai Corporation right now is 426 square kilometers. We don't know the exact figures. The estimated population in the corporation limits is about 66 lakhs. The population density is about 15,500 per square kilometers. I am saying a well-planned, ultra-high-rise city can have double Chennai's population density. That is, you can have 30,000 per square kilometers because you are going to go really high. In which case, you can put up about 30 lakh people, more than Coimbatore, in a compact area of 100 square kilometers or 10,000 hectares. It would be about 5 times the area of Chennai's proposed Parandur airport. It is doable. Of course, I don't think the same kind of resistance will be there for a new city, but you have to do it. If you just allow the city to grow the way it is doing, you are going to have serious problems. We should plan 2 satellite cities for Chennai and 1 satellite city each for Coimbatore, Madurai, Salem, and Trichy. It is wasteful to develop standalone film city, sports city, financial city, slum rehabilitation projects, etc. These should be integrated into the satellite cities. Housing needs of the LIG should also be factored in. It can't be only it can't be a gentrified city. People of all income groups should be there. The vertical satellite city could be developed through a special purpose vehicle, SPV, with active private sector participation. I personally feel there's need to create an SPV to develop satellite cities, not just for Chennai, but for throughout the state. And this should be a major, initiative of the government. Now you may say, even the existing 10-storied or 20-storied buildings are unlivable. What if will a 50-storied building or a 100-storied building be sociable and livable? Can an ultra-high-rise, high-density building be livable and sociable? The answer is yes. It has been done elsewhere. I'll tell you how. Provided it is multi-layered, high amenity, and self-contained. And 2, there is extensive green infrastructure internally and externally so that the building approaches something like a natural environment. It should be mandated to have multiple ground levels at every 10th or 12th floor. That is, if there is a 100-floor building, every 10th or 12th floor should be left vacant and it should be treated like a ground level. The should be called multiple ground levels, and that should be earmarked for civic amenities. The multiple ground levels of the towers to be connected by above ground walkways. Just as you can walk around the towers at the ground floor, you should be able to walk around the 10th floor, around the 20th floor also. Now, this is an actual example here in Singapore, done by an architect firm called Woha. They are very progressive architects. The building is called Skyville at Dawson, ultra high rise, high density, high amenity building with multiple ground levels. You can see every 10th floor or 12th floor is kept vacant. And this is how it looks. Each of the multiple ground levels should have parks, gardens, library, gym, sports facilities, meeting halls, and other amenities. The units between 2 multiple ground levels will form a sky village or a locality. That's a sky village or a locality. The rooftop can serve as an urban farm. I'm not talking some airy-fairy musings. These are things which have actually been done already. The rooftop can serve as an urban farm, and the translucent canopy can be used to generate energy from solar power. Each building will be like a self-contained mini city within a city, minimizing the need for outside travel. Now, this is a rooftop, solar panels on the top, and urban farm. Each building will be mixed use and will have housing, office space, commercial space, hotels, restaurants, malls, multiplexes, auditoriums, rainwater harvesting systems, wastewater recycling plant, and other services. Already you have some buildings like this. Houses, offices, hotels, things like this. Now this is going to be on a bigger scale. The economies of scale for energy production, rainwater harvesting, wastewater recycling, and to some extent urban farming will work only in the case of ultra high-rise large buildings. This will not work with your 20-floor or 10-floor buildings. To be really economical, you need to go big, 50, 100 floors. The second point is how people move around. Now, transportation accounts for 25% of global greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see, cars are the biggest culprit, followed by trucks and other freight vehicles, then buses. Rail causes only 1%, shipping 10%, aviation 10%, others 1%. So buses, rail, public transit is always better. There's a famous saying by a gentleman called Enrique Peñalosa, the mayor of a city in South America. He said, an advanced city is not one where the poor move about in cars, but where even the rich use public transportation. In India, we think it is infra-dig to use public transportation. But really developed country, most people, including ministers, judges, businessmen, they use the public transportation, the metro rail or the LRT or whatever. And I suppose you know what BRT, bus rapid transit is. The bus will have dedicated lanes. Nobody else, no other vehicle can go in that lane. Now this is Bangalore, world's 6th most congested city. Average speed during rush hour is 18 kilometers per hour. There was a recent WhatsApp joke. Somebody was saying, I want to sell my 3rd, 4th, and 5th gear. They are in showroom condition because they have never been used, of the car. Now in India, as per the National Family Health Survey 5, I would have preferred a survey based on RTO records. Only 7.5% of Indian households own cars, 55% own a bicycle, scooter, or motorbikes. Even now, our roads are so crowded, with only 7.5% of the people own cars. In USA, the percentage is 90%. In Canada, it's about 85%. Most European countries, it's between 30 and 70%. Now, people are going on buying cars and motorcycles. At one time, you are going to collapse. Now, at present, we are giving importance to cars, most importance to cars, less to public transport, then cycling and walking. It should be the other way around. It should exactly be the other way around. And that's, as you know, Indian cities aren't pedestrian friendly or cyclist friendly. 40 years ago in Coimbatore, I could cover any place by cycle or walk. Now you can't walk on Indian roads. You have to walk either before 6 a.m. or after 9 p.m., otherwise you'll get run over. And there are no zebra crossings for pedestrians. Even the traffic lights, they don't permit pedestrian crossings. I'm told that those type of traffic lights are costlier. So we don't take pedestrians at all. Manidargalave nama treatment illa. And those pedestrian crossings, which have been built, ugly structures which have been built in several places, they're seldom used. Which shows that we give priority only to cars, not to pedestrians. Our infrastructure, our budgets also for pedestrian and bike infrastructure is negligible. Personal cars, the thing about cars is they're parked 90% of the time. 30 to 40% of all driving is usually the driver trying to find some parking place. A lot of waste happens. Now you'll be surprised. Today, Denmark is considered a world leader in biking and walking. In 1967, a Dutch official declared, as I said just now, that cycling in Denmark was tantamount to suicide. But today, Denmark and Netherlands are leaders. Other cities in the developed world are also rolling back car-centric planning. Cities and streets should be designed first for public transport, pedestrians and cyclists, and then only for electric vehicles. So the current thinking is streets don't belong to cars and motor vehicles. They belong to people. They are not meant only for movement, it's also for people to interact. Now, these are some headlines. Danes dance in streets as auto ban takes effect. It can be done. Even now, for example, Holland, Netherlands has about 30% cars. Singapore's car light policy reduces car ownership to 1/3. In Singapore, there's a ban on cars. They have fixed a number. You can only buy within that number. Somebody has to sell for you to buy. Amsterdam, to cut 10,000 parking spaces by 2025, faces no serious pushback. Barcelona is reclaiming 1 million square feet from cars. Car-free zone should be the future of cities. Many European cities and American cities are declaring many zones as car-free, no cars here. Like we have also done in a couple of places. Congestion pricing, London, Singapore, Stockholm, and even New York is introduced. If you're coming to the city center, you'll have to pay a congestion pricing. US, the one city where people can't manage without cars, even there, a new locality has come up in Arizona where no cars are there. Now this is Champs-Élysées, the famous street in Paris, that iconic street. Now they feel that the street has been spoiled by cars, so they are going to redesign it, give multiple lanes for pedestrians and cyclists, and only a few lanes for cars. The redesigned Champs-Élysées is going to look like this. Now these are the cities which have good public transit. These are the cities which are most bicycle friendly. And these are the cities which are most walkable. And there is a website called walkscore.com in USA and Canada, which for each city and each neighborhood or locality, it tells you what is the transit score, bike score, and walkability score. For example, you can see here, even for neighborhoods, for example, Little Italy neighborhood in New York City, The walk score is 100, the transit score is 100, and the bike score is 94. No, we don't have such systems at all in India. No? And it is not enough if you simply provide a bike lane. It has to be protected bike lane. Otherwise the cyclist will get run over by the cars. No, there has to be protection for the bike, protection for the pedestrians. So it costs money, but people are doing this. Now somebody will say there is no demand. There may not be any demand in India. There's a law in economics called Say's law, which says supply creates its own demand. Once you provide the cycling infrastructure, people will come. Once you provide the pedestrian sidewalks, people will come. I always say that Anna Nagar was planned in the 1970s. New York City was planned in the 19th century. New York City has such broad sidewalks. It has cycling lanes. And, Anna Nagar, you can barely walk. Now, all these things is very difficult to do in the old city, but in the new satellite cities, we can implement all these ideas. Next, how the city's buildings are designed and constructed. We spend 90% of our time in buildings. Buildings alone are responsible for 38% of greenhouse gas emissions, 20% residential, 18% commercial, 11% in construction, 27% in operation. The building materials used in construction should have low embodied carbon. Embodied carbon means that material will have the things which the processes which went into making that material would have emitted some carbon dioxide. You compute all that and call it as embodied carbon. Using recycled materials and local materials can reduce the carbon footprint. Instead of procuring cement from Rajasthan, you should procure it from Chennai. The cement will travel less and there will be reduced carbon footprint. Now, if you look at the embodied carbon per cubic meter, you find that aluminum, surprisingly, has very high embodied carbon. Next is steel, even glass. So the other things have less. So we should go for those building materials which have less embodied carbon. A net zero energy building is one that has net zero energy consumption, producing as much solar or other renewable energy as it uses in a year. That means it doesn't depend on the grid generally. It is self-sufficient in energy. Globally, there are 500 such buildings, commercial buildings, and 2,000 homes which are net zero energy. In India, there are 7 net zero energy buildings. The ministry building of Periyarism Bhavan, the Ministry of Environment and Forests, it was built in UPA time, 2013. That's a net zero energy building. Now, this was the first net zero energy building built in USA, in Colorado, in a very cold place. In 1982, it doesn't consume any energy. Its rooftop solar photovoltaic system produces more energy than it can use. Now, this is a mosque in my native place, Kundapura. It's called the Badriya Juma Masjid. At least these guys have had the sense. They've put up a mosque which is net zero. They have a solar and wind energy and they meet their own needs. Now, we should think of such net zero buildings in Tamil Nadu and Chennai. Now, this is an entire city in Germany which is net zero. In fact, it's not only net zero, it produces 4 times more energy than it needs. The city of Freiburg. And as you see, this is the city hall. And the empaneling is not glass, it is solar panels. So that city produces 4 times more energy than it needs. In India, we are trying to make Sanchi as the first solar city. Now, as you know, there has become a particular pattern of building in India. You have buildings, concrete buildings encased in glass. They don't have any ventilation, natural ventilation. You have to use air conditioning, artificial lighting, high energy load, and the heat reflecting glasses have made the urban heat island effect even worse. The current thinking is that we should revert back to the traditional Indian and Asian architecture. In the traditional houses, you will see there is an open courtyard and there are horizontal breezeways, vertical breezeways, and the house is naturally kept, naturally lighted, naturally heated, naturally cooled. I recently went to Humayun's tomb in Delhi on a very hot day. I was surprised to find that inside Humayun's tomb it was very cool because there was natural ventilation. You've seen these courtyards. Many old houses have. Even the Central Secretariat in Delhi has it. Atriums are covered. They are courtyards which are covered, but there is a lot of open space. Malls have atriums. horizontal breezeways, the wind merely blows through the building. The building will be cool. Your AC bill will come down by 20-30%. Vertical breezeways, the anthill, the termite hill operates on that principle. That's why snakes go there, not only to eat the termites, but also to keep cool. Now, if you do these four things, your AC load, current load, and lighting load will come down. Similarly, inverted skyline building, this is being done in Singapore. They are saying the building should be broader at the top and narrower at the bottom. And so that you can use the top for urban farming and solar, this one, and it provides shade for the people below. And 1 unit thick apartments. 1 unit thick apartment, usually what happens in hotels and others, you have apartments on both sides, a corridor in middle, whereas ideally you should have only 1 unit apartment so that they are exposed to the elements on at least 2 sides. How biophilic the city is. As I said, biophilia is love of nature. We don't have proper data as to the amount of green cover in various Indian cities. That itself shows how little importance we are giving to greenery. Now, the best data I could get was State of Forest Report 2021. Now, don't think this is forest. No, what that report says is it treats all lands more than 1 hectare in area with a tree canopy density of 10% as forest cover. It includes urban forests, gardens, parks, orchards, avenue trees. Now, according to the State of Forest Report, Mumbai has the maximum greenery, 25.4%, followed by Hyderabad, Delhi, Bangalore. Chennai is only 5.3%, mostly because of that Gindi Park and all that. Ahmedabad is 2%, Calcutta is 1%. And there is a city called Salem in Tamil Nadu, which I think must be having some 0.1% or something. I've been there in that city for 2.5 years. There's no trees in that city. A terrible city, actually. Now, this is the percentage of public green space in major cities of the world. Oslo, 68%. Vienna, 50%. Sydney, Nanjing, Hong Kong, Los Angeles, London. London is 35%. Barcelona, Seoul, New York, 27%. Toronto, 13%. Paris, 10%. Now, Paris is somewhat low, but they have planned to increase it from 10% to 50% in the next 10 years. And Singapore is already about 46%, but they are planning to plant 1 million trees in the next 10 years. Now, I've always been interested in greenery, and I've told this story to some people. When I was in school, I had a lesson about the Kew Gardens of London. I was fascinated by the story, so when I was collector, I thought I'll replicate a Kew Garden in Viluppuram. Not all, in Kew Garden in London has 1 variety of every plant in the world. I thought I'll have 1 variety of every plant in Tamil Nadu. And that time there used to be a program called social forestry, which was unfortunately wound up by government in 1996. So I planted that, and after I got transferred, the scheme was also wound up. I had lost all hope, but surprisingly the forest survived. And thanks to Supriya Sahu, got a drone shot of the plantation. This is about 400 acres, 1 acre for each variety. Neglected completely after 1996, but it has still survived. So the reason I'm telling this is, it is not that difficult. People think putting up greenery is very difficult. The trick is not to plant small plants. If you put 6-inch plants or 1-foot plants or 2-foot plants, they will die. The trick is to plant 7-foot to 10-foot tall plants. The initial cost may be more, but they will survive. Now, as I said earlier, when you live in an urban area, you suffer an urban health penalty, mental health penalty. Many people go nuts. We have seen it during COVID. When you're all the time inside the house, you go crazy. So you feel like going out. You feel like taking a walk in the park. When you feel bad, where do you want to go? You usually want to go to a park or go for a stroll, or go to a beach or things like this. And these are solid scientific papers published in Nature and things like this, which says urban greenery has a positive effect on both physical health and mental health. These are published papers, refereed papers, which say that urban greenery has a positive effect on mental health. Now this is Singapore. On the top left is a public government hospital. Look at the greenery there. Next is a primary school. Look at the greenery. Then you have a hotel. Then you have a office complex. Lee Kuan Yew, way back in 1960s, he realized that the best way to make Singapore an attractive destination for investors is to make it a green city and a beautiful city. More importantly, there are certain problems for which nature-based solutions are far superior to pure engineering solutions. Now, as I said, Chennai's corporation, they have 350 engineers to 3 horticulturists. We seem to think that grey infrastructure, that is engineering solutions, can solve all problems. They can't. There are some problems for which only nature-based solutions will work. For example, look at example 1. Mangrove forests are much better at mitigating coastal land erosion, floods and tsunamis than sea walls and groins. Now you cut out all the mangrove forests and then you try to put up a sea wall or groins to prevent coastal erosion. That's very foolish. Example 2. Rainforests and other vegetation do a far better job of sequestration of carbon and for free than the expensive technology of capturing carbon directly from the atmosphere. As you know, to go to net zero, we have to suck carbon out of the atmosphere. The only known things we have at the moment, natural thing, is the trees and plants. They absorb carbon dioxide, and each tree sucks about 22 kilos of carbon dioxide per year. Now, there is also a technology called direct air capture, which can do the same thing, but that costs about $600 per ton. Now, if you know 51 billion tons of carbon dioxide, so multiply 51 billion tons into 600, it comes to $30 trillion. That is the US GDP. Now, even if the cost were to come down to $100 per ton of carbon dioxide, multiply by 51 billion, that is about $5 trillion. That is what India's GDP may be a few years from now. Example 3. In its natural state, a river is usually clean due to the densely vegetated corridor called riparian buffer on either side, which is usually interspersed with natural wetlands. Together, they filter out sediments, nutrients, pollutants, and cleaner water through bioremediation. If you see any river in a natural state, it will be clean. And if you see on either side of that river, you will find a dense riparian vegetation. And you will find some natural wetlands. The natural wetlands serve as nature's sewage treatment plants. So the water going into the river will be clean. Now, you cut all the trees, obviously your rivers are going to become dirty. Example 4, this is a funda not many people know. Unscientific dredging and sand and gravel mining destroy the hyporheic zone, which is the river's liver. It harbors water filtering microorganisms that purify water naturally. It plays a critical role in recharging the groundwater table laterally across large areas on either side of the river. Now, the hyporheic zone is between the groundwater and the stream. That's a critical layer, and that contains many naturally occurring microorganisms which can filter the water. The dirty water gets filtered. The riparian buffer filters the water, the hyporheic zone filters the water. Now, when you do sand mining, and that stupid sand mining or dredging, all these things are lost. And this hyporheic zone is also useful for recharging the groundwater. So both this buffer, this riparian buffer and hyporheic zone, are responsible for recharging the groundwater. Now, our villagers instinctively know this. They may not know the science, but they know that sand mining causes water levels to go down. They all know this, that's why they keep protesting. Now, this is Chennai flooding, recent flooding. You've seen this. Now, as I said earlier, when a city expands horizontally, you start paving more and more surfaces. Now, in our high courts and many other people think that flooding is because we have occupied erstwhile tanks and low-lying areas. Even if you didn't occupy erstwhile tanks and all that, you will still have the urban flooding. This chart explains why. In a natural ground cover, when rain falls, 25% is shallow infiltration, 25% is deep infiltration, that is 50% of the water goes into the ground, 40% is evapotranspiration, only 10% is runoff. That is stormwater runoff is only 10% in the natural ground. 50% goes into the ground recharges the aquifer. Once you pave the road, pave the surface, either in the form of roads or sidewalks or whatever, shallow infiltration becomes 10%, deep infiltration becomes 5%, evapotranspiration becomes 30%, runoff becomes 55%. Runoff increases from 10% to 55%, that is 5.5 times. Groundwater recharge decreases from 50% to 15%, comes down by 70%. And evapotranspiration also comes down. So, once you pave the surface, city surface, urban flooding is bound to happen. There is no escape. I mean, it's not just because of the Eri, Giri and Adanala Mattu illa. Urban flooding is essentially a problem of impervious surfaces. Studies have shown that for every 1% increase in impervious surface, annual floods increase by 3.3%. The conventional engineering solution is to convey the polluted stormwater through expensive cement concrete drains to the nearest lakes, rivers and canals, what you call stormwater drains. Now, I've always been saying, and most of you know, that stormwater drains are necessary but not sufficient. They're unsatisfactory. The recent floods in Chennai showed it. Why? Because, number one, city's terrain may not be even, it may be highly uneven. And a city has several low-lying spots. Water can't go uphill, so it will collect in all those low-lying spots. And the water has to be disposed of to some lake, river, or sea, or canal. Now, there are many areas which are far away from those places. So, you are bound to have this problem, you know. Whatever you may do, you are bound to have this problem. So, what do you do? So, this picture shows here that when you have natural cover, groundwater infiltration is 50% and stormwater runoff is 10%. Without it, it is 15%, stormwater runoff is 55%. So that is the funda. You need to supplement. You definitely need stormwater drains, but you need to supplement it with green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is just a fancy term for trees, trees, parks and all other things. Green infrastructure reduces the extent of impervious surfaces and increases the area of absorbent land. Either panname, neenga flood avoid panna mudiyadhu. Even then there will be floods, but at least it will be less. It slows down, soaks up, filters and stores rainwater where it falls as much as possible. Now green infrastructure, now as I said, space is at a shortage in cities. You can't, so you have to fit in greenery wherever possible. This is green roofs. Many cities in the world have green roofs. Chicago was the first to do it. Toronto has mandated that any building with more than 2,000 square meters built up area must put up a green roof. The last corner is a university in Indore called Prestige University. They also are having green roofs. Next you have green walls. The top left is the first green wall in the world. It's in Paris, built by a guy called Eric Blanc. It's near, Eiffel Tower. It's as much of an tourist attraction as the Eiffel Tower. The bottom right is Bangalore's latest airport, Terminal 2. They have a green wall. These are simple things like medians. You should throw out all those ugly concrete medians, put planter boxes like this. Bioswales, nothing but a fancy term for a ditch. Don't pave. The moral of the story is allow the water cycle to behave naturally, stop paving. Now if you look at the average corporation of Chennai Park, 50% of the area is paved. These are rain gardens and constructed wetlands. See, natural wetlands are there by the side of the river or the sea. Most of them have been lost. Now you have to replace them with constructed artificial wetlands, avenue trees, then parks and gardens, pocket parks. In places like Netherlands, many places in Europe, they have closed many small streets and they converted them into parks. They have said, car inge varakudade, and park pannirom. So there are a lot of pocket parks. The funda is, if the park is more than 100 meters or away, people won't go. They will feel lazy to go. So the park should be as close to you as possible. Urban forests. There are plenty of lands, open space reservation areas in Chennai city, which are lying idle. They should all have been forested. Slaver patave vaangittu poitan, thathalarukku duddu kodutittu in the open space la. So there should be a massive program of afforestation.
permeable paving today is basically, I've done a lot of residential block paving permeable systems. This is the first time I used it.
So these are what are called permeable pavements. You get porous concrete, porous asphalt, தண்ணி விழுக normally concrete is porous. அது non-porous-ஆ நம்ம ஸ்பெஷலாக பண்ணுறோம், பட் பழையபடி விட்டிங்கன்னா அது போரஸாக இருக்கும். Then underground stormwater walls in low-lying areas, you have to temporarily store the water to prevent peak flows. Yeah. Now, as I said earlier, we have completely neglected green infrastructure in India and in Chennai also. Green infrastructure is multifunctional. It increases the sequestration of carbon. The only thing which sucks carbon out of the atmosphere is trees and plants. It reduces stormwater runoff, protects water bodies from stormwater and agricultural pollution, increases infiltration to the aquifers, reduces the heat island effect, lowers heating and cooling energy costs, cleanses the air, improves citizens' health and well-being, provides relaxing amenity spaces, offers opportunities for startups, generates a lot of employment for skilled and unskilled labor. Actually, we can do this through NREGA in villages and then bring them and plant the things in the cities, Provides habitats for animals and birds, beautifies the city, increases the property values. There are so many advantages. Now, grey infrastructure projects like stormwater drains are large-scale, expensive, and publicly funded interventions. Green infrastructure is mostly small-scale, decentralized. Individuals can do it. Rotary clubs or service clubs can do it. Companies can do it. Since nearly 60% of a city's area is likely to be privately owned, roping in non-government players is crucial. Or government mattu panna pathadu, you have to rope in private players. 3 Chennai rivers are dead. Nothing can bring them back to life. It's a news item, recent news item. I don't know if you remember this picture. This is Shivaji Ganeshan's song, Naan Anupodhu Kadidamalla. This is Kuam River in 1965. 2 things you notice. Though it is black and white, the river is fairly clean. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting in a boat there and singing. And number 2, you notice that there are dense vegetation on both sides of the river. I told you earlier, for a river to be clean, there must be a dense riparian vegetation on both sides. The moment the riparian vegetation goes, your river goes. Neenga enna panniyu prayojanam illa. The test of success of river restoration is the return of thriving aquatic life to a river that was once biologically dead. All the 3 Chennai waterways are dead. You'll be surprised to know that London Thames River in 1850 was dead, was exactly like this. In 1850s, it was stinking so much that the parliamentary sessions had to be adjourned several times. In 1957, Thames was declared biologically dead. The Rhine River passing through Germany and Netherlands, that was declared dead. The Suzhou Creek passing through Shanghai was declared dead. Singapore's, Singapore River and Kallang River were declared dead. All these have since been restored to life. Actually, Tamil Nadu was a pioneer. DMK government 1967 vandapoye Annadurai aarambichar idu. Kuam restoration, 2.2 crores were sanctioned in 1967. Right now, works are going on for about 2,500 crores, but we have not been able to succeed because this is not an easy thing. It will require sustained hard work. Lee Kuan Yew took 10 years to restore a river which is 3.2 kilometers long and 10 kilometers long. Chinese government took 40 years to restore the Suzhou Creek. The Rhine River also took 40 years. Thames River, it took 50 years. So these are long-standing projects. Namma aalungalala indha ivla long sustain panna mudiyumaangradhu doubt. Now, when you talk of river restoration, you must be aware that there are 2 types of sources. One is point sources, another is diffuse sources. Point sources are industrial pollution and sewage. These you can identify. Other is diffuse sources, stormwater runoff, agricultural runoff. Either ninga thadukka mudiyadhu. When a river is flowing, a river doesn't come passes only through city, Chennai city. It comes from some village. It passes through several villages and several small towns. வரப்போயே அது பொல்யூட்டட் ஆல்ரெடி. த அக்ரிகல்ச்சரல் ரன் ஆஃப் இண்டஸ்ட்ரியல் இதெல்லாம் அங்கேயே இருக்குது. ஸோ நம்ம 2-3 மிஸ்டேக் பண்ணிருக்கோம் சென்னையில். வி ஆர் ஃபோக்கஸிங் ஒன்லி ஆன் த ஸ்ட்ரெச் ஆஃப் த ரிவர் வித்தின் சென்னை சிட்டி. Adayar River, for example, about 15 kilometers in Chennai city, 42.5 kilometers overall. Kuam is about 18 kilometers in Chennai city, 72 kilometers overall. And the meedi 54 stretch already polluted. If you are doing, you should do for the entire river. You should put up the riparian buffer along the whole river. And there's no point in putting parks and all that, parks, bamboo plantations, you have to put only native vegetation, which has got deep roots. So the last point that we are touching is how circular the city's economy. Circular economy means you recycle, reuse the city's waste. The existing economy is called linear economy. You take materials, make and waste. You dump the waste, either you burn the waste or you put it in a landfill. The circular economy says take, make, reuse, share, repair, replenish, recycle. This is circular economy. Now this is the various types of waste that you typically find. A circular economy is one that doesn't throw waste products away, but recycles, repairs or reuses them or recovers raw materials from them. A fully circular city can cut down resources used by 28% and greenhouse gas emissions by 72%. The need for land is also reduced. Segregation at source is the key, not easy. We segregate but it's not very easy. Now, as you know, there are various types of waste. You have organic waste. You will be surprised to know, rich countries, about 40% of the food is wasted. Poor countries, 20% of the food is wasted. When I say wasted food, I don't mean wheat waste, kadala, in the supermarket waste. So, and waste, food waste itself contributes about 6% of greenhouse gas emissions. That's atrocious. So organic waste can be used for to making compost, fertilizers, biogas. Construction waste can be used for making sand, can be broken down and aggregates or metal for construction. Glass waste can be converted into sand. Steel, copper, aluminum and zinc can be recovered from the waste in near 100% purity. Plastics, rubber, leather, wood and packaging materials can be used as fuel. Now there's a new funda called Product as Service, PAAS model. I had some discussions with Mr. Karthikeyan and Muruganandam also yesterday. Philips of Holland has now changed its name to Signify. What they are saying is, we will not sell light equipment here afterwards, we will only lease it to you. For your house or office or something, we will install the lights. The advantage here is, in the present system, segregation of the waste is a problem. In the European Union, they want to make the manufacturers responsible for taking back the waste and reusing it. They're bringing the regulation saying that it shall be the manufacturer's job to take back the waste. So this, for example, Corporation of Chennai or all municipalities in Chennai, they may use this service for street lighting, for air conditioners, refrigerators, all electronic goods in the system. Europe, headphones, phones, it's called product as service. You don't give the product, they only lease the product, they take the product back. Even headphones are used like that.
Did you know that these glass containers can be made into sand? One company.
No, basically, the point is, glass bottles are made of sand, you can get back sand. So, the manal, now, the point is, there's a solid business opportunity here. There's a lot of agricultural waste in the form of crop residues. As you know, Delhi's air pollution problem is because of the crop stock burning in Punjab, Haryana and all that. Now, ideally, those things should be bought from the farmers, paying some value, and used to produce biofuel. Now, if we biofuel can cropland divert panni, biofuel grow pannirukom. Whereas you have already a lot of agricultural waste lying around all over the country. And there is recently Prime Minister inaugurated one first biofuel production company from crop stocks. I think Tamil Nadu nama pannalam. And all this urban waste, municipal waste, nariya products pannalam. As I said, glass, you can convert it into sand. And I think our industrial policy should be reoriented towards these kind of initiatives also. Now, this is municipal solid waste recycling worldwide. The highest is only, I think, Slovenia, about 58%. But India, we 70% பண்ணியாச்சுன்னு சொல்லிட்டு இருக்கோம். But India பேரே இதில் வரல, இந்த லிஸ்ட்டில் வரல. And till now I was talking about solid waste, you also have liquid waste. And only 28% of urban wastewater is treated. The balance 78% is disposed of in rivers and lakes. That is Yamuna River. You can see how it is. Next year, Dal Lake in Srinagar. That is Bellandur Lake in Bangalore. Bellandur Lake in Bangalore, which actually burnt once, And this is our Kuam River. This is Chennai's day zero. You're all aware of this. Now, in 2018, Niti Aayog came up with a report saying India is facing its worst water crisis in history. 21 cities are at risk of running out of groundwater. Chennai, Bangalore, and all these cities were included. Now, basically, if you take Chennai, we have only 4 sources of water. Surface water, 83%. Groundwater, 2%. Desalination seawater, 11%. Reclaimed wastewater, 4%. You'll be surprised to know, as I told you in the case of, river restoration, Annadurai began it in 1967, 10 years before Singapore did it. Tamil Nadu did wastewater reclamation in the 1990s, a small plant in Chennai. Singapore and Israel did it only after 1995. We did it before them, but we never really progressed in a big way. Similarly, Tamil Nadu started its first desalination plant, a 10 MLD plant in Ramanathapuram in 96 or 97. Singapore, Israel did it along with us. Now they have gone much further. So as you can see, surface water and groundwater contribute 85%. Desalination water and reclaimed water, 15%. Surface water ke limit. We have reached the limit. Groundwater poche, surface water illa. We are now hijacking water from rural areas and bringing them by tankers here. That will not go very far. So the only 2 sources are desalination of seawater and reclamation of wastewater. The only 2 sources available that are climate independent and elastic. Their combined share of Chennai's, as I said, right now it is, according to me, in 2030, the reclamation of wastewater should go up from 4% to 10%. Desalination should go up from 11% to 20%. Groundwater and surface water should come down. And by 2060, wastewater and desalination should go up even more. Surface water and groundwater should come down. If you don't plan for like this, then you're going to have a serious problem. Because there are practical limits to how much surface water you can get and how much groundwater you can get. The only 2 available sources are desalination of water and reclamation of wastewater. About 80 to 90% of the water we use becomes wastewater. Reclamation is a long-term solution for the water crisis, also a must for health and environmental reasons. Only reclaimed wastewater should be mandated for non-potable uses in industries, construction, landscaping, hotels, hospitals, large apartment blocks. But drinking water poi construction use pannirukan, toilet use pannirukan, garden use pannirukan, adukella potable, non-potable water da use panna sollanum. Sustain public education to overcome the yuck factor. People don't like this reclaimed water, so both Singapore and Israel enna pannirukanga, sustain public education, they have done that. So I'll come to the last part of my lecture. Just like FSI, there is a funda called green plot ratio. FSI is built up area divided by plot area. Green plot ratio is green area divided by plot area. Now in Singapore, they have mandated green plot ratio must be at least 100%. நீ ஒரு ஏக்கர் லேண்ட் எடுத்து அதில் பில்டிங் போட்டியானா 1 acre, அட்லீஸ்ட் 1 acre greenery இருக்கணும். எப்படி ரூஃபில் போடுறியோ வாலில் போடுறியோ எப்படி போடுறேன்னு எனக்கு தெரியாது, பட் இருக்கணும். Germany they prescribed about 30%. Namala edu panla. Some different countries are prescribing different levels. Singapore is very stringent. They have prescribed minimum 100%. Next is what is called community plot ratio. As I said, vertical buildings can be unlivable unless you provide amenities. And to provide amenities, I said you multiple ground levels. Every 10th floor or 12th floor should be left vacant for provision of amenities. So, andamari amenities at the area of community space provided divided by area of the plot is called community plot ratio. Next is self-sufficiency index, is a measure of the building's capacity to produce its own energy, food and water. I already told you some buildings have produced 100% of energy. They are also producing more energy than they require. Now, the taller, the bigger the building, I told you, they can produce their own energy, their own food, own water. I mean, by recycling wastewater, they can do it. So this is a measure of how much the building is able to do it. The last is carbon footprint of the building. Now, Peter Drucker said, what gets monitored gets done. No, unless you monitor, yathana carbon dioxide emission agudi, what is the carbon footprint of each building? When you buy something, you find in the box a list of ingredients, sometimes a list of calories of those, energy of those ingredients. In the future, varum. I mean, if you are putting in a building, constructing a building, people will say how much embodied carbon that building contains, what kind of materials are used. I think CMD and all should start working in this direction. Now I'll just show you a few examples done in Singapore. Many others have done it. I'm giving the Singapore example because Singapore is closest to us in terms of climate and other things. Woha's Newton Suites, Singapore, green plot ratio 130%. That is area, land area, plot area, 130% greenery provide pannirukanga. Community plot ratio is 90%. Of course, water 60%, energy 0, food 0. Next, Woha's Park Royal and Pickering Hotel, in a green plot ratio is 240%. That is 240% of greenery. Community plot ratio is 150%, so much of amenities they have provided. Water 65%, energy 1%, food 0%. This is Woha's Oasia downtown Singapore. Here, green plot ratio is 1110%, 11 times the plot area is greenery. Community plot ratio is 300%, water 60%, energy 0, food 0. Now you may think Singapore la mattada panna mudiyum. They have done it in Dhaka also, BRAC University Dhaka. Green plot ratio 130%, CPR 250%, water 20%, energy 25%, food 0%. They have done a building in Mumbai also, but adukku details kadayadu. Namma alunga idella insist pannala nenikren, details kadayadu. Now the last slide is vision of a city of the future. This is how a future city is going to look like. As I said, it will be high-rise, dense, multi-layered, lot of greenery. It will produce its own food. It will produce its own energy. It will produce its own water. It will have 0 carbon impact. Thank you. One last point I would like to say, please don't think I'm saying this to save the planet. Planet is going to be fine. We are doing this to save ourselves. The planet has been around for 4.6 billion years. It has survived meteorite strikes, comet strikes, volcanoes, magnetic pole reversals, everything possible under the sun. The planet will be there for another 4.6 billion years or more. It is humans who are in danger.
I'm a final year student of the university.
Yeah.
So my question is, like you rightly mentioned about circular economy and climate resilient infrastructure. Now the obvious goal is to move towards green infrastructure and smart infrastructure. But sir, while doing so, by when can we expect the identification of vulnerable groups, be it in the slums or on the streets, and to rehabilitate or reintegrate them based on prioritization factors, maybe based on age and gender, and also familiarize them on how to use and maintain them in the long run?
See, as I mentioned, the existing Indian cities grew organically, haphazardly, without much planning. And all these things we can do properly only in a new satellite city. That's the only way. I mean, existing cities, major redevelopment, there's a big locality which is being demolished and rebuilt, yes. Otherwise, it is very difficult to do all this. And as far as slums are concerned, the one mistake, the current thinking is slums should be developed in situ. That is, you remove the existing land, build up high-rise buildings for them where they were. You should never dislocate them and send them to some far-off place, where they don't have means of working and all that. That's a very wrong policy, not only in Chennai, but in many cities people have followed. I mean, there are 3 or 4 takeaway lessons from what I said. The first is we have to develop a satellite city. At least one satellite city for the mega cities, and 2 satellite cities for Chennai, and 1 satellite city for Coimbatore, Salem, Trichy, Madurai. We have to do that. And number 2, we have to focus on public transport. We have to improve our buses. We have to improve the cycling infrastructure. We have to improve the pedestrian infrastructure. Number 3, give greater importance to green. We have completely neglected the green infrastructure. Number 4, give great importance to cycling. And number 5, while constructing the buildings, we have to make sure that they're zero energy buildings or zero water buildings. If a mosque in Kundapur can do it, I don't see why others can't do it.
Sir, if you have to go very high with these tall structures, would we be able to address the earthquake related, the structure should be earthquake proof, really earthquake proof, and also fires and other calamities. Do you think we'll be able to address those issues?
No. Actually, in Chennai, as I said, our FSIs have been very low, 1, 2, 2.5. These problems have already been, it is possible to make buildings earthquake resistant. It is possible to address the issues of fire and other things. But going high rise makes sense because you are making full utilization of the land, and the city's imprint should not be too big. When the city's imprint is definite, let's say within 100 square kilometers, laying water lines, laying sewage lines, arranging transport, everything is easy. If the city goes to 1,500 square kilometers, it becomes impossible. There has to be a trade-off, and the general worldwide, and I also told you, a dense city has less carbon footprint than a urban sprawl. So from all points of view, from traffic congestion point of view, from air pollution point of view, from loss of valuable agricultural land point of view, from carbon footprint point of view, urban sprawl is bad. This is a universally accepted principle. I think there's no exception to it. We have to confine the city to a narrow footprint. All those measures you said, they can be taken care of.
Regarding the technical point, of course, you told these planting bamboo along the river beds, or rather the banks of the rivers, may not be,
No,
ideal.
I didn't mean, I said monoculture should be avoided, lawn should be avoided, park should be avoided. As far as possible, it should be native vegetation which deep roots, which can withstand the flood, which is easy to maintain. It should not be some exotic trees. You can't put jacaranda trees or something like that in a park. It should be native vegetation. I said generally avoid monoculture.
According to that, the landscape, I think we can choose a species and we can go ahead for especially for the inside of the bank.
The lawns are supposed to be bad. See, what happens is when you do all that.
What I mean is the inner bank of the rivers. So let us not selected the very deep-rooted plants. What happened during that, rivers like this one, Kuvam or Adayar, when the heavy flood comes, it gets uprooted. We are seeing, for the last 2-3 floods, lot of...
No, what exactly is your question, please? What is your question?
No, you told that, of course, you answered also. We can go for instead of monoculture, we can go for the multi-culture.
No, I said there was a tendency in Chennai to put parks, lawns, bamboo plantations, eucalyptus, things like this. I said this is not the correct thing. No, of course, they have corrected themselves. You should do native vegetation, which requires least maintenance. That's the way to go.
Okay.
So good evening, sir. Myself Anand Mohan. My question is regarding developing satellite cities, sir. So practically, when we develop satellite cities, especially I come from Kerala. So in states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu, where there is high population density, where we can't find proper green spaces for developing, green fields for developing future cities, how do we rehabilitate the people who are already there while we are in the process of developing a new city?
No, that is not really a problem. See, as I said, we must do a special purpose vehicle. We should float a company for this. And the people can be paid either they can be paid fully in cash or they can be paid partly in the form of shares of the special purpose vehicle, so that if the company is doing well and they can also partake of the benefits in the future. Various things are possible. But yes, you have to uproot some people. As I said, when you are planning to go vertical, 100 square kilometers, according to me, a 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer city, satellite city can accommodate 30 lakh people, more than Coimbatore city, provided you are going vertical. And this is about 5 times, our Parandur airport. It is doable. And when you explain to people that this is the reason why we are doing it, and you must have, of course, fast mass rapid transit between the satellite city and the main city. Things have been done and things should be done. What I'm saying is, Chennai will go up to Pondicherry and Vellore, and avungalukku and the connection alla varadhukku 10 varsha agum. And it's just not, it's not manageable. Humanly, even 426 square kilometers, our fellows are struggling to manage. I mean, you can imagine what will happen if it is 1,500 square kilometers and the population is 2 crores. I mean, I told you about that Hangzhou, Suzhou and all that. That collective area is about 10 crore population. It's more than several countries, you know. So it is not easy. I mean, even 426 square kilometers, we should realize that, I mean, having a compact city makes sense. Worldwide, everybody goes high rise. I mean, they go high rise for a reason. Because you are making effective utilization of the land and so many other, I mean, mass rapid transport, walking, ellame convenient. Cycle 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer, you can cover the entire city by cycle. You can cover by cycle, you can cover by walk. So it is possible. My idea is to make you think. I'm not giving a set of prescriptions. This is not a manifesto or anything like that. I'm only saying we need to rethink. I mean, there's an old famous Apple slogan called think different or something in the 2000s. That's the point I'm trying to stress. We must think different.
உன் கடவுளை விட உன் சாஸ்திரத்தை விட உன் முன்னோரை விட உன் வெங்காயம் வழக்கமாத்தை விட உன் அறிவு பெருசு அது சிந்தி